participation continues with the curatorship of Derek Gibson. Derek?
Thank you. I'm going to give people a moment here just to circulate in. And I'm just having a look over the people who are currently in the room just to see who we have.
Maybe you want to repeat the names of people who are supposed to speak?
I see a few of them. I've been checking them off sort of in the last 10 minutes as I've seen them arriving.
Yes.
So I will keep doing that. So just for anyone arriving, we're going to start very, very shortly. And this is the Theme 6 Session 2 breakout room on the social inclusion and public participation theme. And I will be moderating in a moment.
Thank you.
For our speakers, as well as our response panelists, if you can take a quick moment now just to check the share screen function at the bottom. If you do have a slide presentation, don't activate it yet, but just to see if the option is given to you or if you're locked out from doing it. And if you're not able to, I'm just going to quickly find the email address that we will have you send that email to. And then they will be able to get your slides ready to go from whenever you're. Okay, so I'm posting the email address now. If you can send your presentation to that email address, and we will have the UEF facilitators get that ready. And it looks like our first speaker, Zara Kassam, has indicated that she doesn't have that function. So I will just give that as a heads up to the staff who are running things very ably behind the scenes for us during the conference, just to have that either to enable the function or maybe it's that it needs to be emailed. And likewise with our other participants, if you could just check in very quickly if you do have a slideshow, see if the share screen is provided as an option. And if it's not, shoot that off real quick to the email address that I just punched into the chat box.
Hi, Derek.
Hello.
My name is Elda. Hi, I'm Elda, and I'm the one that will be receiving any of PowerPoint presentations that are required. And I will be sending it to Ozan. Just wanted to introduce myself.
The chat box gives her email.
Yes.
Hilda.cordero@uforum.org. Yeah.
Yes.
I see a note here from someone just asking that it looks like they say they want to go to the boardroom, or maybe they mean the main room. In the bottom right corner, it should say leave room, and that should take you to the other room.
Yes.
Correct.
Not leave the meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, don't leave the meeting, just the room.
You're not going to come back. Good. We have all the way from Australia. Heidi Victoria, good morning.
Yes, good.
Good morning to you. Very early good morning to you.
Yeah, good that you could join us, yes. It is tomorrow. It's tomorrow today, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tomorrow today, yes.
Lovely.
Okay, Ilda, let me know if and when you see that file arrive. I'm assuming Zara is sending that to you.
Okay, I will let you know. Let me check.
Thanks. Yeah, Ilda, I've just sent it to you by email.
I'm still waiting for it. Just give me one moment, please.
Could we then start off with those people who have their presentation already there?
We may be able to do that. Giuliano, do you have the ability to share screen, or do you need to share the screen?
If you want, I can start because I'll only speak. I don't need a presentation.
Oh, okay. Then why don't we do that just so that we can keep the ball rolling? So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off this session. Welcome, everyone. My name is Derek Giberson. I'm a city councillor in the city of Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. The easiest way to locate yourself, if you're trying to figure out where that is if you know where Toronto is. We're about 45 minutes east of Toronto. We are part of the Greater Toronto Area. This whole area, it makes up the third largest urban agglomeration in North America after the Greater New York and Greater Los Angeles areas. So although we are sparsely populated across our Great White North, normally in this area in particular, there are quite a few people clustered in the warmer south part of the country, and that's in relative terms, because if you've been here during the winter, no one ever calls that warm. But we've had some great dialogue so far in the social inclusion and public participation subject domain, which is one of the 7 identified focus areas for this year's Urban Economy Forum. Looking forward to carrying on that dialogue as we have already today. Very important subject, near and dear to my heart, the ward that I represent. We deal with urban poverty and other issues that see disparities in income and so forth. So certainly with the speakers that are speaking this afternoon, looking forward to hearing their insights. And without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Giuliano de Oliveira, and I hope I got that right, and apologies in advance for any of the names that I butcher in my attempts, but Giuliano has worked as a research and policy specialist for UNICEF, producing the flagship report, The State of the World's Children. Prior to that, he served as a program officer at UN Habitat, coordinating youth development in the Latin American Caribbean regions. And he's a national of Brazil, holds a PhD in international relations from the Graduate Institute in Geneva, Switzerland. And I will go ahead and pass it off to you. You have 7 minutes, sir. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Derek. Well, let me also thank the Urban Economy Forum for this invitation, especially my dear friend and former director, Ananta Krishnan, for this invitation. I'm very glad to participate in this conversation and discuss with you all on this such important topic. And since we're focused on social inclusion and participation, I wanted to share with you some thoughts on the importance to include children and young people in the way we think and conceptualize our cities and the way we see urban development in general. It's now clear that the global crisis triggered by the COVID pandemic is unprecedented. The social and economic impact in our society has been tremendous, particularly among children. And it's clear that the impacts are not limited to health, but they extend across a wide range of issues: water, sanitation, education, domestic violence and abuse, mental health, and particularly among young people, employment opportunities. And with this scenario in mind, I think it's an important moment for us to reinforce the importance of thinking about urban development, thinking about our cities with a strong focus on child rights, inclusion, and participation. And thinking about child rights, inclusion, and participation, the concept of a child-friendly city is particularly helpful. Because a child-friendly city it's a town or a community or a system of local governance that is committed to fulfilling these child rights. It's a city where the voice, the needs and priorities and the rights of the children are integral parts of the public policies, programs and decisions. So it's basically a city that is fit for all. And in this conversation of a city that is committed to child rights, I want to emphasize that we need to work and promote 3 key areas. One is to strengthen the capacity of local governments and other stakeholders to deliver results for children and young people. I think they must have the means, not only the human, but also the financial needs to support and deliver results at scale for children and young people. The second would be to reinforce the social inclusion component to ensure that no one is left behind, particularly the most vulnerable. And we saw now during the COVID pandemic that the most vulnerable are usually the ones with the highest burden in times of crisis. And the third component would be strengthen child and young people participation. And I wanted to share with you a few remarks about participation, which is a fundamental right of all children and lies at the heart of building a child-friendly city. And the active engagement of children, include those that are marginalized and vulnerable, is essential if the policies, services, and facilities that they use or that affect them are to reflect and address their concerns, ideas, and priorities. So basically, if the local governance mechanisms are to respond to their needs, we need to meaningfully involve them. And children and young people should play a significant and active role in building more inclusive cities. It is ultimately their experiences within their communities that will determine the success or failure of the public policies in place. And when we're talking about children and young people participation, there are different mechanisms that we can do that, we can make it happen. And I think we can mention three different ones. One is consultative approach, that you young people and children can share their perspectives on what has changed and how they feel about the realization of their rights in their communities. That can be done through surveys or focus group discussions and activities. The second one would be a more collaborative approach where children and young people can play a more active role in designing and analyzing findings and helping to formulate the recommendations. And the third one, it's more a child and a youth-led approach in which children and young people can take a leadership role in the process. And here, talking about participation and consultation and youth-led approaches, I just want to briefly mention the current work that we're doing at the State of the World Children report. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with this flagship report, but it's the major flagship of UNICEF. Every year we launch this report to present the world an account about the situation of children in a particular topic. And it's been 2 years that the report team is now incorporated consultation with children and young people as part of the official process. So over the last 2 years, we organized more than 100 focus group discussions with children and adolescents around the world in more than 40 countries in order to create this space of meaningful engagement and partnership, and giving this young people and children a space that they can help us not only to build solutions, but also to understand the problems that is affected then. We did this work, firstly, when discussing about the impact of digital technologies among children and young people. We did this work last year on nutrition when discussing diets. And now we are doing this work on mental health, which is now, it's a very important topic in the context of COVID-19. So I invite you all, if you're not familiar with this work, to check our webpage, the State of World Children report. And we also launched some companion reports with the findings of these reports. And I just want to conclude by saying that if we are to think about cities that it's really delivering results for youth and for children, I think they are at the end delivering results for all. Thank you.
Giuliano, thank you so much. And you will be getting an honorable mention for coming in well under the 7-minute mark.
I planned for that.
Good. Great, thoughtful points on the need for intention in how we engage with our young people and our youth, rather than just assuming that their needs will be met. So thank you for those comments. So I believe that we are now okay to do Zara Kassam's presentation, that we have her materials. So I'll go ahead and I will do a very brief introduction. Welcome you, Zara. Zara is the founder and CEO of Kua Urban Space by People. She's an innovative strategic design, urban planning, leading an innovative and strategic design urban planning consultancy based in Kenya, looking at African cities in particular in their work. Their model involves placing people and communities at the forefront of our problem-solving processes. And Zara, we are looking forward to learning more about your thoughts on that today. So I will hand this over to you, and I see that we have 15 minutes set aside for you. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Derek. So will someone put up the slides for me, or
I'm on mute. Oh, hi.
Hilda.
How are you? I have sent your PowerPoint to Ozan, our tech. So just one moment, I'll be making sure, okay?
No
Thank
problem at all. Thanks.
Very much.
Well, I can also begin, and the slides can also come in because I know that everyone is strapped for time and we want to move a bit quickly. I just want to start by saying thank you for the invite. It's a real honor to present at the Urban Economic Forum, and thank you, Krishnan, of course, having worked with you before and continuing to see how you're doing in this world. So I thought that today I would speak a little bit about a project that we've been working on in Nairobi, Kenya. It's really about public spaces in low-cost neighborhoods in Nairobi, but also a little bit about innovation on the ground, how we actually use participatory methods, a little bit on sustainability and how we've had to actually, let things go and be able to leave, which I think is an essential part of speaking about any urban projects, any participatory projects, that we are not residents in that neighborhood or even in that city, and what it means to come in and try and work there, and as well as leaving, and what that looks like. So I think the PowerPoint or the PDF seems to have a little bit of an issue.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I don't know if the tech can see that, but we're only seeing half of the slide. And I also just have to do a very quick announcement. If David Miller is hearing right now, he's being sought in the other room. So if he can leave this room and go to the other one where he's a panelist. I was asked to make a public announcement for that. So sorry, carry on.
Okay, Derek, apologies. The computer told me to come to this room, so
No
I came.
problem.
Great.
Okay. We just wanted you to be in the right place, that's all.
Awesome. Okay, so this slide is great. Thank you. So just to go back, so this project was called Making Cities Together. All in all, it was about a 4-year project, and I'll walk you through our process and the elements of each process, and I'm happy to then go into like a discussion on thoughts over here. So overall, we started this process with an inventory of public spaces in Nairobi, Kenya, and this was in about 2014, where the new master plan for Nairobi had just come out. Urban planning was suddenly a thing that people understood a little bit more about. Looking at citywide interventions was still, it was thought about, but it really wasn't being done. And so that was the sort of context we were walking in, and talking about public space, which of course is a very, low on the priority list when there is such large amounts of poverty and other issues in a country. So we started off with an inventory to understand what is going on, and took it to research towards a design lab, and then towards implementation, and finished off and sort of launched at the moment with the platform. Next slide, please. So the first thing we actually did was look at 17 public spaces first around Nairobi. And we did a socio-spatial, socio-economic, socio-environmental, and took a couple of perspectives on how we were actually going to study these spaces. And we then limited it to 3 spaces on how we will go deeper into research. And these spaces were Givenchy Gardens, which is actually in the CBD, in the Central Business District, and has been there for years and years, was owned by the Givenchy family and given to the city county to actually manage for them, so given to the country to manage. Korogocho, which is a street, which is a neighborhood in an informal settlement, and they're really known for skating. So if anyone knows Korogocho, that's what they know. And then Dandora, which is a low-cost neighborhood where the dump site of Nairobi lives as well. Next slide, please. So going into these 3 spaces, you can see here, we actually did a lot of research where we involved students from universities in Kenya, so public and private universities. The reason for doing this is because we, in KUA, we believed that bridging the gap between theory and practice is essential for the next generation of practitioners. Not only getting them onto the field, which is really, really rare, even for architects and urban planners in these universities, but also mixing the teams so that different perspectives can come into designing your city. And I can actually tell you many, many stories about these, about teaching here and about using our case study to teach, where teams, you know, really broke down having to work with anyone that's not in their own department, whereas other teams really thrived. So with them, we went into deeper research into these spaces. Next slide, please. So you can actually see from this slide, this was Korogocho, where the research showed that the focus on this public space on a street, which is a street in a slum that no cars enter at all. And so the street has been turned into a skating and music sort of park for the youth of Korogocho. Next slide, please. The in-depth research for Givenchy Gardens in the CBD, we found that it was mostly about seatings and meeting areas for a lot of work, for a lot of workers in the CBD. Next slide, please. And for Dandora, and for the Sunken skating park. Now, this was something we had to eventually leave out of our research because it was being turned into a 17-story car park. And so even though it was really, really interesting, where the youth from all across Nairobi, no matter what your background was, they had created this sort of skating park and had created different systems of like a beginner's lane, and around it, because it was kind of sunken, you had parents and just the public sort of watching, having a bit of like meeting area under the trees. There were people selling food. So a really, really great leisure park, essentially. And lastly, looking at Dandora, which was already doing a little bit of work. Next slide, please. Where they were trying to identify as youth who had got together to reclaim their public spaces within their courtyards. And essentially the history of the Dandora was that it is actually really, really planned and planned well. It was a project by the World Bank, I think in the 70s. And it was because of maintenance and a little bit of lack of ownership, you could see that it's really deteriorated into a low-cost community, as well as the dump site being right outside their window. Next slide, please. So you could actually see here that we went from the deep research into a design lab, where we got practitioners from the global setting who came on their own accord, wanted to be part of the Making Cities Together project, together with local practitioners, so architects, planners, environmentalists, anyone, engineers, even anyone who was within this ecosystem of city planning. And then we also had the university students who worked on the research make up the team that was accompanied by CBO or representatives from the community that was the focus for those teams. So the teams were essentially broken into the 3 public spaces that we were focusing on. Next slide, please. And so here was the winning solution, which was for Dandora, which growing up was known as, and it still is, the dump site of Nairobi. And perception is that it is a slum, but it's not. It's a low-cost neighborhood. The residents identify as that, and really try and work together to changing the perception. So the actual strategy for improving the public space within Dandora looked a little bit like this, and I'll walk you through it. So Dandora has a lot of courtyards that were already having these youth clean up, try and reclaim the public spaces that were within the courtyards, that were designed and the space was there. It was just that it became these mini sort of rubbish piles instead of being used as public spaces. So the youth actually started to clean up and reclaim these spaces. And so there was definitely a change maker called Charles, who was part of the CBO called Dandora Transformation League. And so we start with him, and then we look at like, okay, how can we clean and continue to clean the courtyards? And then how do we go towards reclaiming and doing up the streets that connect all these courtyards that the markets are in, where the children are playing, where you're coming in and out of. And then from there, sort of including all the businesses, the individual ones and the big scale ones, and then going towards the factories, and then trying to look at, okay, how do we engage with the dump site, given that, you know, there is a lot of sensitivity around the area as well. And then, of course, there's a railway station that's closed that's just behind the site as well. So there were steps to this, and there was also this leaveway that actually belonged to the public electricity company in Nairobi, who were not using the space. It was an open space where children were playing. And so we tried to see if perhaps during this project we could actually access them. So this was the strategy that after the whole design lab for a week, we held a public forum, and the public got to vote as well as a panel of experts. And it was the Dandora strategy that won. Next slide, please. And in theory, the strategy targeted a street, like I said, that connected the different courtyards that were already improving their public space and their courtyards, whether it was with color or cleaning up or accessing the drainage or reclaiming the public spaces. They were already doing something. And they, and so we had, as you can see in this picture, the street that sort of had a loop and had 4 access points to it. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, that's the actual street, and you can see that part of the design meant that we would also need to work on what a gateway would look like, or at least an entrance, and try and target the security issues that also exist there. Next slide, please. And so this was the scale solution in a way. You can actually see clearly here how close the dump site is. And the dump site is actually, in terms of height, is perhaps like 4 stories high, or perhaps more now. And so even if you are on this side of the road in your courtyards, you look out your window and that's what you see. You drive out of your courtyard and into the city, that's what you see as well. So the scale solution here was to go courtyard by courtyard, street by street, and then try and go to all the courtyards in Dandora and influence everyone else to also reclaim their public spaces as well as their streets. Next slide, please. So in reality, you know, we took the approach of placemaking. We took the approach of participatory citywide interventions as much as we could. And we also tried to look at how can we bring innovation to the ground. So we started to think through design thinking and using technology innovation as well to try and include as many groups as we can. Next slide, please. So this is what, when we came into Dandora, into implementation, this is what the street, at least one entrance of the street, looked like. Next slide, please. And this essentially was what we hoped for at the end of our intervention. Next slide, please. And so the entry point in how we actually did this was we started to look at what is going on in the community, what can we build on, and make sure that we're not coming in with something that is not doable, that the ownership is not on the CBO and the residents as well. And so we started to look, next slide, please. We started to look at what was going on there. And as you can see here, there's a small courtyard And this is Charles, who was this change maker who rallied his youth troops. And this site that you can actually see behind him was a mini dump site within one of the courtyards. And he was able to transform it with color, with grass, with drainage. And they started to have the slogan, which is Dandora is not a slum, it's an estate. And this, next slide, please. And this actually mobilized a lot of young people to start doing this everywhere else. So we said, okay, let's build on this. Next slide, please.
One remaining, Zara.
Sorry?
1 minute remaining.
Oh, 1 minute. I thought I had 15. I'm sorry. Okay. Let me go through this really quickly. Could we like go through the slides a bit quicker, actually? So yeah, keep going. So we did a lot of digging for drainage. Next slide, please. We had a lot of building parties where we involved youth, and we brought in artists to help with like the theme of what color actually meant for courtyards. Thank you. We used design thinking to identify where happy and unhappy places are, and actually looked at how dustbins could be designed to be more owned and kept and maintained. Next slide, please. And so here were some of the solutions. And next slide, please. And then, of course, this was the part where I think we can really look at innovation on the ground, where the entrance and looking at what was needed. We brought in Minecraft, the game, to help design the space and help people think away from a guard and a gate as an entrance and security to other things that could actually create a welcoming and safe entrance to the street. And as you can see here, it had a lot of elements involved in it. But next slide, you could actually see what the designs look like after the Minecraft exercise. Next slide, please. And so there were different elements like this, which were welcoming, accessible streets, catered for disability as well, and the bus stops and children playing there. Next slide, please. We included local architects, pro bono, of course, and this is what the designs ended up looking at. But if you just fast forward now, you'll actually see the reality of the floating zebra, which is what it was called at the end of the project, which was built, painted in the colors that represented the communities there, the courtyards that were there. And so just as my last point now, this is standing. There are 4 entrances that are standing. The streets are maintained, and the community have scaled up. They have created a competition, not just for their neighborhood, for the courtyards, but they've gone wider into Nairobi. Next slide, please. And now have gone into like even some of the other neighborhoods that are not low cost or even the slum areas. They're really looking at wider Nairobi, and it doesn't matter what context you're coming from. They are continuing. They're winning prizes, they're winning funding, and that's the element where, you know, we had to step out, of course, and let them continue with this as well. And yeah, that was, you know, a cleaner Dandora, a cleaner, greener, safer Nairobi, and a cleaner, greener, safer Kenya. So yeah, I'm so sorry to have rushed that at the end.
Thank you so much. Incredible work, and incredible work that brought the community together to help design the work. Look forward to the responses from our response panel later. Thank you so much for sharing that experience, and we will keep moving along. So the next session presenter, excuse me, we have the Honorable Heidi Victoria. She is a former Minister for the Arts and Women's Affairs. She has a very diverse work background experience, a board member for the National Council of Women of Australia. She's been a member of Parliament, State Minister, clinical support specialist in cardiology, and many, many more things, as well as being a professional photographer, an arts consultant. So it is early in the morning where she is joining us. So we thank her for rousing herself from the middle of the night and joining us today. So I'm going to hand it over to you, and you have 7 minutes. So welcome. Oh, and just make sure that you're unmuted. I think that you're still, there you are.
That's better. Thank you all so much for the invitation. It's great to be here from, I was going to say sunny Melbourne, but it is actually still pitch black out there. I'd like to touch today on social inclusion and public participation and what they look like in a post, or currently now in a COVID and also post-COVID world. What you've got in front of you, of course, is the beautiful city of Melbourne, and we've done public participation very well historically. In a country where arts and culture are not as embedded in many children's early years and not as prolifically promoted as they are in places like Europe, we're learning how to engage with those who don't see themselves as lovers or devout followers of the arts. It wasn't an accident that in Melbourne we were crowned world's most livable city 7 years in a row. Some of that was due to our commitment towards the UN SDGs, especially goal 3 of good health and well-being. For me, the fundamental premise behind that goal is equally weighted between physical and mental well-being. And it's especially the latter where I think the arts can help people and societies recover after major trauma. And you would have seen that we've had horrendous bushfires about 6 months ago, or of course the global pandemic, which currently engulfs our world. The quality, but also the quantity of socially inclusive public offerings can be a game changer. By way of a bit of background, in Melbourne, we've had a strong history of great initiatives like, if we could go to the next slide, we had White Night starting back in 2013, which some people would know around the world as Nuit Blanche. We've succeeded in making contemporary art available to everyone. In the first year, we attracted about 400,000 people. In the second year, just over 500,000. The brief was to inspire dialogue and engage the general public, not traditional art followers. And during the first event, I remember standing in the middle of our main street. It was a very warm evening, some 30-odd degrees at night, and watching a diverse couple walking around and scrutinising an ice sculpture that was melting. And they were in their mid-20s, and one said, "I don't know what it is." And the other one said, "Yeah, but I really like it." And I thought, hey, they're discussing public art and they didn't realise they were engaging with it. I was also standing outside our National Gallery of Victoria, which is a huge monolith of a building. And inside was an installation, which was a cascade of soap bubbles. And people were corralling to get in to see this thing. And of course, that would have sparked questions about what constitutes art, but also would have changed the topic of conversation for them and their friends, which I thought was, a really beautiful thing, and shed a little tear, which was nice. It was really, I guess, a perfect example of how public art can have an impact on and be impacted by public spaces. And there's so much in that for all of us. Then there's Moomba, which I think I've got a slide for. And that's our annual celebration that we have in March. It's the largest celebration of its kind in Australia. It goes back to the 1950s. It attracts millions of people. In fact, our record was, I think, 2018, where we had some 3.8 million people, which mainly includes families and small children. It's free and, a huge carnival. There are major cultural festivals in Melbourne. We're known as a festival city. If I could have the next slide, please. We've got the Melbourne International Jazz Festival and the Melbourne International Comedy Festival. The Comedy Festival is the largest standalone one and the second largest international comedy festival in the world. In 2019, we had 183 free performances and nearly 160,000 attendees enjoyed them. Regardless of their means and demographics, which I think for me is key. It also has an amazing agenda of inclusivity, including competitions and showcases to discover teen and Indigenous talent, which gives everybody a platform. Next slide. Our M Pavilion, which is similar to, some people might know, the Serpentine Pavilion in London. It has lots of free programming with a focus on inclusion. Lots of multicultural events, and it's funded by a combination of philanthropy and state government contributions. Right across the state, we also have a very specific social inclusion initiative, things like, if I could have the next slide, please, the Choir of Hard Knocks and street choirs, whose aim it is to reconnect isolated, vulnerable and marginalised members of our community. So how do we take this? Moving forward, how do we transition to do all of this in a socially conscious way? Well, in my mind, there are 3 stages of coordinated action needed from governments. The first is an immediate reaction to stop the hemorrhaging within all sectors, so whether that be the arts or retail, tourism, hospitality, even manufacturing. The second is a time of reassessment, thinking outside the box of what has been physically possible in the past. And then, of course, a plan of long-term recovery that develops resilience, not to mention, accommodating increased cleaning and more remote spacing, limiting physical attendance numbers, that type of thing. These will be all more effective if governments are open and transparent about their processes, if they consult with the public, not just traditional stakeholder groups. Success will come with joint ownership of new initiatives, which learn to embrace our new normal and encourage the most general participation possible. So obviously that sounds great, but how do we do this? Well, departmental silos have to be disintegrated. No longer can the arts be excluded from governmental or societal conversations and decision-making when it comes to policy in education, health, and other areas. Those that hold the purse strings need to support arts and cultural initiatives that consider mental well-being and also health equity. Finding new ways of connecting the broader community with the creative sector is vital. We need to seek local expertise and combine that with the world's best practice on including marginalised groups in society, making everyone feel welcome, including children. And I liked what Giuliano had to say about all of that. And if we can go to the next slide. Because obviously children are the ones who need to grow up with inclusivity as second nature, and then we won't be having, hopefully, conversations like this one. Understanding how our community currently engages, but also how willing they are to use emerging and established technologies will be essential research for every location, no matter what size. Online content has, of course, meant new audiences for lots of festivals and artists, and has seen the emergence of new ways of inclusion, like watch parties. And I don't know whether anybody's done it, but sometimes they're fun. It's not the same as standing shoulder to shoulder in a crowd, but for many, like me, it's been an acceptable fix for, those of us missing shared experiences. Rethinking the delivery of events like White Night is possible. Decentralising it, taking it out to the regions, that will obviously avoid the crowds. It will also make it more family friendly, and that's just one thing we can do. Programs for the Comedy Festival or the Melbourne International Jazz Festival can be streamed, and we already did a bit of that this year, and that's both free and ticketed events. And that's so that we don't miss out on having, for example, lots of international acts who can't currently travel to Australia. Using, if we can have the next slide, please, using the talents of graffiti artists to bring tourists to otherwise unknown regional areas. And what you're seeing on the screen there is our wheat silo trail in the state of Victoria, where I live, so further up north. And that started to provide prosperity to some of those towns that were flailing a little. So some of this is obviously progressing now, and it's very exciting. And we'll finish up with the last picture. In my view, I suppose most importantly, to progress long-term, we need to ensure deliberate consideration and embracement of gender balance, socioeconomic status, and a raft of other factors by those developing the governance, policy, and also content. Then we can move towards achieving truly genuine and sincerely inclusive initiatives and programming for all in our society, from the smallest town to a big, beautiful city like mine here in Melbourne.
Heidi, thank you so much for this, and the overview that you provided really is a look at the possible as well for many cities to see what you've done in Melbourne. And on a personal note, for myself as someone whose background is professionally in the cultural sector as well. It's wonderful to hear and see this kind of advocacy for arts as not as a silo, but as integrated in how we do everything. So thank you for that. And yeah, I will move on now to Pooja Bajad, and I'm just going to bring up my notes here. So Pooja is a developmental sector professional with almost 10 years experience across national and international NGOs and intergovernmental organizations. In a variety of program management roles, she has managed large-scale, fast-paced project design, implementation, and scaling up primarily across the education and youth development sector. So she's currently working with the Commonwealth Secretariat's Economic, Youth, and Sustainable Development Division. And with that, if you're all set to go, I will hand the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you so much. It's way past midnight for us here in India. Greetings. I hope the fan right above my head doesn't disrupt anything, doesn't distract everybody. My talk's basically based on my experience of managing, designing, implementing, and scaling up programs in the development sector across over a decade-long experience. And I want to start with rewinding back to June this year, when the news about India's migrant exodus foreshadowed a looming economic crisis in the country. I witnessed firsthand what a movement of people in those numbers really meant. Migrant workers walked hundreds of kilometers as the cities they helped build failed them at the first appearance of a crisis which in fact disproportionately affected the migrant workers in the first place. What we saw fissures in development planning, programming, and overall governance earlier was now a gross exhibit of complex systematic failures. These visuals were later seen across the world through civil rights conflicts, peaking unemployment rates, dipping economies, etc. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted lives, plans, and processes that we earlier envisaged. Even before the onset of the crisis, the social and economic integration of young people and marginalized groups was an ongoing struggle. But the emerging circumstances now point to the desperate measures that call for a systematic overhaul. I want to use this time to speak about three specific issues: the North-South divide in research and program planning, the scope of partnerships, and mainstreaming marginalized voices. The idea is to kind of bring all of these together through anecdotal evidence and just a dialogic approach, I guess. I worked on an early grade education program in urban and rural areas, which was designed in collaboration with my colleagues in the US, and it was tested across about 5 other countries. The initial implementation in rural India ran comparatively smoothly until we replicated it across Delhi and Mumbai, which are far more populated and complex than some rural areas that we earlier worked in. This is where we saw each grade run into 5 sections with over 40-50 students in each class within transitionary classrooms, and where grades were kind of joined together to kind of make for the lost space. The lack of space to set up libraries and find teaching times was managed with a collaboration with state government and other education authorities within the state. What brought the program to a complete standstill, on the other hand, was the long absence of children from classrooms and differences between language of instruction and those and that of and their home language. Also, just to pause here for a moment, the truth is most of this absence resulted from migrants kind of from their parents moving back to their homes, and that seasonal migration that continues to show in urban areas mostly. These hurdles were in part due to the fact that each country, each region, each state provide a whole different setting from the research or the conceptual frameworks, and that some of our programming is initially based on. A lot of these hurdles could be avoided if we relied on local language or local knowledge systems in the initial stages instead of piloting models and then contextualizing them. So kind of looking back and doing it the other way around probably. The global North-South divide in research practices and processes is not a novel thought, but it's crucial to think about it now more than ever. This brings me to point number 2, which is the scope of partnerships in the current context. I've continued to ask myself whether a program on early education, early childhood education, literacy, adolescent and youth work can really quite be delivered in a through a holistic partnership of sorts with urbanists, healthcare workers, governance systems, mental health care professionals, etc. We need better partnerships between various agencies and ensure that our expertise kind of complements each other. The youth mainstreaming project that Lane Robinson mentioned earlier during the discussion kind of spoke about one of the ways in which these gaps can be filled, with young people's voices kind of mainstreamed across development planning and governance. And finally, I want to start with how stakeholder dialogues with our current framework often tend to exclude marginalized voices or those of communities that we want to serve. There continues to be a huge dialogue around development agencies moving south, as in physically shifting bases, and that probably is not such a bad idea. Global dialogues impacting socially excluded groups within exclusive settings with a handful of representatives often making the cut to these meetings is not a real solution. In many ways, COVID-19 presents a solution to do more with current technology and reduce those gaps in the first place. The huge digital divide appears to be much more manageable than the barriers we have continued to witness in the pre-COVID world in many ways. In conclusion, I'm personally excited to see the many ways in which we've learned and unlearned during the lockdowns. Amidst a global health crisis, a lot of work being done in the sector is truly inspirational. Our commitment to serve communities has been unwavering, and that symbolizes an agility for change. That's my 2 bits. Thank you.
Pooja, thank you very much. A lot to digest in terms of, in particular, your recommendations on better partnerships between government and education, mental health, especially for our youth and for marginalized communities right now, which was a bit of what I touched on in my presentation in the previous session. So it's great to hear other voices that are prioritizing that. So thank you for bringing these thoughts forward. We have, before our panelist response, we have one more speaker. So I'm going to turn this over finally to Fazile Dadvar, who is a professor of geography and rural planning and urban academic platform secretariat at UEF. She is, I'm just looking around. Okay, yep, there you are. I just wanted to make sure that you were still here, and a familiar face at UEF, both from input into the thought and dialogue, but also with supporting bringing the programming forward. So without further ado, you have 7 minutes, and I'll pass the microphone.
Thank you, Derek. Good afternoon, everybody. As Secretariat Academic Platform of UEF, I would like to appreciate your valuable participation. I really enjoyed from all lectures that I heard from morning up to now. I'm going to speak about gender-sensitive urban planning toward sustainable development goals very briefly. Next, please. Despite the presence of participation of women in urban areas, women face barriers in participation in city spaces. Women encounter various spaces and engage in different roles of the city daily life, such as social, economic, biological, and recreational, within different functions in the city. Women possess distinct and differing needs as they navigate city spaces that ultimately have not been traditionally designed and structured inclusively. Next, please. The main questions that I would like to raise is how we can develop women-friendly city. What are the impediments in our current urban spaces that limits women's participation in moving towards sustainable development goals? This situation can be affected by both the historical challenges in discourse and public and private dichotomy and unequal participation of women through exploring the Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations, particularly Goal 5, that underscore the importance of inclusive urban planning and diverse equal participation in position of leadership. Instead of that, I emphasize on the elements that makes our city women friendly. I would like to say what elements and ideology prevent our cities to be more friendly, more women friendly. One of these elements is exploitation. Please go next slide. Next slide, please. It's the central factor that impacts the interaction of women and urban space in different ways. Women face exploitation in their limited access to social, political, and economic spaces, leading to further inequality, particularly under systems of capitalism and patriarchy. Women face further exploitation through race, socioeconomic status, cultural background, and sexual identity as well. Next is marginalization. Marginalization has contributed to the unequal participation of females in urban spaces. This related to conditions like public space and spatial design. And also the pandemic experience shows that the women and men are not affected equally from this crisis. So the marginalization of women is evident in the lack of women in a position of power and how cities are designed and the legislation that regulates urban planning in spaces. Exploring public-private dichotomy through the lens of the gender division of a space and rigid gender norms help us to understand marginalization deeply. Another element is patriarchy. Investing the elements of patriarchy provides insight into the lack of power in urban spaces that have largely upheld system of patriarchy. It starts from family and extends to the city and rural space. So women are not able to yield enough power. Another factor is cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism had led to exploitation of women and the commodification of female bodies within everyday life. It has been emerged in the objectification of women and the permeation of colonial legacy of race, gender, and sexuality. And finally, violence against women. Next, please. Lastly, the prevalence of violence against women within the household and in urban space, both as part of dialogue and in physical form, influences female participation in cities. Looking at violence in homes and cities can impact female participation and representation. Even the feeling of insecurity can impact how violence permeates within urban space and limits participation, which can harm people's quality of life. As a conclusion, these 5 factors are the core of discourse regarding a critique of gender-blind planning in urban areas and emphasize on a gender-sensitive planning to make sure that the structure of urban planning is inclusive and justice-oriented. So to reach to the goal 5 of United Nations, we need to make sure to remove these barriers in process of urban planning and provide a safe space for women in the cities, which contains a majority of world population. Finally, likewise, Giuliano, I would like to say I need to emphasize that the city which is safe for women will be safe for children and men as well. Thank you.
Fazili, thank you very much, and a very incisive and clear call on the needs of gender equity and equality in our cities. And again, similar with children and youth, the need to be very direct and deliberate in our efforts and in the drafting of resolutions and how we design our cities, to not just assume that they will have gender equality, but to ensure that we're designing it into the fabric of our cities. So thank you very much for that incisive presentation. So with that, we are moving on now to our panel response segment. Each of our panelists have 5 minutes, and I'm just doing a quick check here to see. Oh, there's Zara Hojati, and I am going to pass it over to you first. Each of our panelists for response have 5 minutes, and she's an associate researcher at the Center for Trust, Peace, and Social Relationships, and look forward to your responding comments today. So you have 5 minutes, go ahead. Oh, and you're still muted. There you go.
Thanks, Derek. Thanks to all. I'm Zara. I'm so happy to be here, and thanks UEF for inviting me for this fascinating topic. Actually, I should apologize you for my voice because it's a couple of days that I have cold. It's not COVID, and so don't worry about anything. And I just I'm so happy that I heard lots of issues that I want to raise via all your speech, and even in these 2 days we heard about anything that relate to urbanism and real estate and all other factors. But I should honestly say that I'm not an urbanism economist or real estate developer, but I'm a critical anti-racist feminist who simply like to reflect on this theme as a racialized immigrant scholar mom. So in these 2 days, most speakers talk about the importance of Habitat Day, housing, building capacity, community building, and the goal of SDG, especially in this crisis time, COVID-19, climate change, and systemic racism. I'd like to draw your attention to this question that why COVID triggered us. Because the city health education system is not ready for crisis. And fundamentally, we have structural racism, which brings inequality in our city, in addition having a capitalist agenda. I like to address what Fazili talks about, the gender issue. We can talk about the structural racism which is inhabited in our countries, in our society, in diverse aspects. So marketization of everything create more vulnerable people around the world. So we need to take a real action indeed. Based on this theme, I'd like to address that what do we mean by inclusive society? And I believe that interdisciplinary program and approach we needed to have a very dynamic and meaningful collaboration among all sectors, including private, public, and all partnership that we call it P3. So regarding the definition of inclusive city, I like to address the important things is about the connectedness and engage in decision making in social, economy, and community aspects. Can we imagine a city without people? Consider that during the COVID, all of us were in quarantine, and it was some cities were like a ghost city. There wasn't any business. There wasn't, barely business that provides something. But why the city is important? So it is that gives meaning. So it is really important that we strengthen people, their diversification of their identity, who they are, their culture, their nationality, their religion, their language, their sexuality, everything matters. Even in the language now that we are in this world, all of us are different. But the beauty of this difference is that we can learn from each other. So, in addition to this inclusive society, we should make a connection between people past and their present time. If people can make a connection between who they are in different locations that they are, they can make more responsibility about the place that they are living, and they can call that a living space their home, not just the building, not just the house. So we are looking for creating this home space, a safe place for all. If we can have happy citizens, we can actually eliminate racism and discrimination and violence that Fazil and others talk about, those issues in our cities. So we can promote hidden violence when we don't have happy citizens. So people, I can promote, I can say this kind of solution for how we can have inclusive society. First of all, we should decolonize our perspective, having anti-racist integrative lens to see all aspects of one's identity, see all people. Outside the world is a reflection of our inside. If we are racist people, we see that. If we plan those things that ignore people from all diverse agenda avenues that there are, actually it is us that we practice this. So we need to enhance, to educate. Anti-racist education, inclusive education must be taught since kindergarten. That when we talk about the participation of youth or kids that we have in Kenya and other places that other speakers elegantly talks about this, it is something that we have to feel from bottom of our heart. Inclusiveness is something that all of us needed. And we should provide and enhance opportunities, resources. People have to have access to information, equal education, health, and other things that other people, speakers talk about that. And in this COVID, we noticed that not all of us are the same page. Refugee or people, disadvantaged people from all, in rural areas, they didn't have access. I remembered, and in one of the telegrams thread, kids used the leaves as a mask and compared to other things, and use marginalized people's their ability, their skills, see them, and give localized education, use indigenous knowledge for bringing up our voices. And at the end, for pilot city, we need to practice in a multicultural city to practice hard skill, soft skill, and strength or diversification. For this, we can be all together, united, be in diversification, because it's like our body. Our body has different organs. If one organ doesn't work properly, we don't have a healthy life, mentally and physically. Hopefully for that time, we can promote more engagement. And thank you for time, and thank you for all of you.
Zara, thank you very much for these wrapping thoughts that that tie together a lot of what was shared earlier. I'll move on to our next panelist, Sharmar K. Abdullahi, and he is with the Program Management Office at UN Habitat. And just in the interest of time, I will just go right ahead and provide 5 minutes for you to provide response for our presentations from earlier. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks, everyone. It was really inspiring to hear everyone's thoughts. And Derek, I think I have to give it to you. I haven't seen or heard Oshawa presented that way in a very succinct, very creative way. So thank you very much for that. I'm just down the 417 in Ottawa at the moment. I am from Ottawa and have lived here and grown up here my entire life, and moved to Nairobi about 3 years ago to join UN Habitat. And it seems like there's a recurring theme here of colleagues who work in the youth space in UN Habitat and kind of doing social inclusion. So I started off there and now managing our donor relations and strategic partnerships unit. So I think this conversation is certainly fitting, and I'll try to tie in what my previous experience has kind of led to the work that I'm doing at UN Habitat. And some of the themes that have been recurring throughout the day is really kind of leading through diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we've heard from Sarah just recently, and many of the other speakers, whether it's with respect to including children in the urban planning and including children in all aspects of city living, but also, you know, the issues of systemic racism, really addressing that head on. As structures that we're in, and as the UN, which is a very old institution, we are also addressing the issues of systemic racism at the moment to be thinking broadly around how we can provide services and the work that we do in a more equitable, diverse fashion, and addressing that again systemically. The other, you know, key recurring theme that I've heard throughout is thinking about participation and thinking of underutilized tools. You know, in the previous session, we've talked about, you know, social media, the use of Twitter, the use of Facebook in terms of engaging and looking at a wide participation of people. And I think at UN Habitat, we often talk about how the world is urban, with more than half of us living in towns, cities, and human settlements in the battle of sustainable development, which is often discussed as, you know, cities being a battleground for this to be won. But also kind of living in a digital world, and with the current pandemic at the moment, I think it's a far reality that we are living in a very digital space. And I think in terms of how we can include to use, you know, different tools and thinking outside the box to really engage with people in a more holistic and inclusive way. And I think if you look at, you know, the engagement of young people who are digital natives, I mean, the tech space is certainly and the use of social media is certainly a space where they're natives of, and I think there's a lot to be learned from them. You know, I have a 4-year-old who can magically log into my iPad and unlock it with some ease. So you talk about the use of technology and thinking outside the box in terms of public participation. I think we need to be mindful of all the different tools that we have in our disposal. You know, I think the other thing that I've been hearing kind of recurring throughout the day has been, you know, the make participation a reality, not as a very tokenistic tool, where we have, you know, boxes that we tick off. Is there someone that is represented from a gender perspective? Is there a youth? Is there someone from a diverse perspective? So not using it in a very tokenistic way, but being very meaningful and intentional in our approach when we talk about inclusion and diversity. Are the right people who can really advocate for those who are not in the room, you know, can really, you know, be at the table and ensure that we have that perspective that is not represented. One of the things that I often ask myself, and I think, you know, I've heard this a little earlier throughout the day, is, you know, who's in the room, who's around the room, and who's outside the room? And I think those 3 questions really get at, you know, are we really being diverse in terms of our approach to ensuring that the equitable voices in the room are being there to lead and kind of make the important policy decisions that we need to make and be thoroughly inclusive. So for the sake of time, I won't labor in on some of the other points and speech that I had. I really wanted to hone in on the issue of people of Black descent, of African Canadians, and the Canadian government, who's come up with a really holistic approach to addressing the issues of systemic racism and anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism in Canada. And, you know, this being the real, you know, within the United Nations, the people of African descent. You know, this is a huge push within the UN system to really now address the issues of systemic racism. So I will reserve those comments at a later date, as I feel like a lot of them have been addressed here. And I'll, for the sake of time, end there and happy to answer any questions and connect with colleagues outside. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you very much for that, and some very good, again, some very good tying together of some of the highlighted discussion, as well as some very timely pieces here in Canada and around the world right now, both with anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism, and what we are doing or need to be doing to address that, and who we are making sure isn't at the table or is at the table, and if they aren't, what are we doing to make sure they're represented? So thank you for those closing thoughts. And I will move on now to our next panelist. We have Michelle Dubois, who is a campaign strategist, a communication specialist, a researcher, an analyst, a policy analyst, and advisor with a very diverse background in terms of equity-seeking groups that she has worked with. And I will cede the floor for 5 minutes, Michelle, to you for comment and thoughts on our discussion today. And I think you're still muted.
There you go. Good. Hello, everybody. I want to thank you for the opportunity of participating today. Yeah, you named me the title when introducing me. That's because I have been and I'm still wearing many hats. But I guess I'm here. I'm here because I've been doing a lot of work with Indigenous, in particular First Nation, in the last plus 20 years, starting at the Assembly of First Nation, and then after like 7 or 8 years, moving more grassroots. Currently, I work on a project that's related to health. We talked a lot about inclusivity, but a lot about sustainability too. So the project is really aiming at health everything. So when the government started their health transformation process, like I thought to myself, like that cannot be only about healthcare provision. We keep saying that health determinants are key to actually improve health. So I took upon myself as a consultant to approach 34, like the program says I work with for Gambler, but in fact I'm contracted by them, but I've been working with Southern Chief Organization. And then I turned toward Havana because Indigenous communities are drastically and underfunded. So when I looked, like I had a relationship with Cuba and could see that like things were far from being perfect. I lived there myself a couple of years, and as Krishna, very difficult to find shampoo and different food products there. But when it comes to health outcomes, they're just like on the top of the world, right? They have the best outcome, like similar to the one of the richest nation. So I thought this fits well, like the need of Indigenous communities. So that's what I've been working a lot and I presented on that, and we will talk more about it in other opportunities. But as a panelist, I would like to underline like what I saw that was very interesting here. We talked a lot about inclusion, the importance of engaging, and I think that's a mistake as a policy analyst that I see that has been rectified a lot. Like I'm a bit older, and when I first started, I was always amazed, like thinking we're all expert around the table, but people are not being consulted, they're not being engaged. Now that's changed a lot, and that's great. And I think that it's very important, like I took notes here, but I really like the presentation of Giuliano underlining the importance of including the youth and the elderly, and also to not assume that like the needs are being met, but to really do a specific assessment to ensure that these needs are met. So I took note in particular, and I guess I don't have a lot of time, so all presentations were great. But I would like to go back to the presentation of Zara, because I really related to it, because as somebody that does a lot of work like right now, but in the past on different projects, right now it's health and targeting health determinants to improve health outcomes. But I've found like throughout my 20 years of career that we tend to wait, and a lot of Indigenous communities, but in general, I work with municipality, worked at the provincial level, out level of governments, and in different setup. And I find that we tend to actually wait that, like we ask a lot for improving of condition, and we tend to wait to start the job. So I really like the job that was done here, and they did that with Zara, and I think it was called Kuwa. because it just demonstrate how much you can do with little. And going back to Cuba, they also demonstrate that, like, that you need to, you're able to start, like, you can, like, actually, I was looking at the green tire that we use as seed. This is also something that they do in Cuba, and this is also something that we do in indigenous communities that have a lot of imaginations. So I think I'm gonna end here because I don't have more time. Do I, Derek?
You have 1 more minute.
I have 1 more minute. Well, I think I'm still gonna stop here because this is really what I wanted to emphasize, that the importance, like, for I think I'm gonna end like that, the importance of health in all policies. I mean, this is a principle that were put into an initiative of PAHO, the Pan American Health Organization, but just like to keep the focus in general, that, like, and we should see it with the status, like the shape of the planet right now, that if we don't put health at the front of everything, we're not gonna have sustainable nothing, right? It needs to be at the center of everything. And then and that focus, we should not wait to have the perfect and better condition to start the job. The SARA project showed that we can start right away with keeping the focus on health. And thank you everybody for the presentation and the great work of Habitat for Humanity. It's great. Thanks.
Michel Dubois, nous vous remercions. Thank you very much for some great wrap-up thoughts in terms of health determinants, as well as the need to integrate assessment into our efforts to create healthy urban city environments, and make sure that we are assessing and measuring and knowing what those outcomes, whether it's working, right? We have to be able to measure whether it's working or not.
It has to work.
Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. I think that that wraps it up because there's a panelist that isn't with us, wasn't able to make it. So Evan, I think that at this point, is everyone going to leave the room? They select leave the room, and then we'll move over to the main session room. Is that correct?
Yes. Thank you, Derek, so much for first curating this session. We really appreciate your deep involvement with UEF, with the pavilion, and our work with UN Habitat. And we always appreciate your support, and we always enjoy working with you. So thank you so much with that. And also to all the participants and panelists who took the time to prepare and share very valuable, inspiring remarks and presentations. So we really appreciate joining for our second annual forum. So we now conclude this session, Theme 7, and then we'll now move on to our last session, which is kind of one of the main programs of the conference, which is drafting of the resolution, which the other room